There we go. Well done.
Eins, zwei, drei.
No. Wonderful.
Bonjour.
Welcome.
Salut, ça va?
Bonjour. Ça va bien? We are delated that you are here. So yay.
We presume you're here.
We hope you're here.
The numbers are going up.
The numbers are going up. Yeah. Wonderful.
Sell, buy.
Okay. Cool.
National Hagfish Day. Go out and squeeze a slimy fish.
Yeah.
And wonder why there isn't a National Tinaphore Day or a National
Nematode
Staphylinid Day. Yeah, maybe it's just every day is a nematode day.
Yeah,
Is my
maybe.
color good?
Yeah.
My Fonzarelli here?
You're good.
Okay.
You're good. Okay. Yeah. So Hagfish Day, and we have a colleague, a friend who does research on hagfish, and so for us, it is one that we celebrate. Yeah,
Dr. Fudge, we
they're
miss you.
very cool organisms. So definitely check them out. Olivia is doing a cat, and I don't want to interrupt it. So,
So we're stuck.
So we're stuck here.
You might have to revisit that decision.
It's really good.
I remember what the email you were talking about now.
Okay, super.
Shout.
Yes. I
Is it
don't
that
know.
one?
Doesn't matter. Thank you. Are we screenshotting? Are we good?
Hells
Yeah.
I
Because
mean,
Kaylee's like, no,
very
wait.
definitely.
I want to. No. Kaylee deleted. Okay.
What?
No, it's okay. We're good. Screenshot it.
I'm trying to get there.
Okay.
You know how the Zoom works.
Yeah, I know how the
Sometimes
Zoom
it doesn't.
works.
And then sometimes it's a really grabby grab.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful elephant. You've done really well. I think it's like now totally colored in, eh? Yeah.
Yes, we will.
Awesome.
I'm going to try and speed that up and put it on Twitter.
Okay, good. We will tweet it out. Delightful. Thank you all for coloring it. It
For
makes
all
us
the
all
things.
very happy. Okay. And before we get started, quick announcement. There are cool things happening on campus. Generally, let me just suggest that doing these cool things, even if they're on Zoom or whatever, can be one of those like random events that totally changes your life. And so if you know of any of these like events that are welcome and open to everyone, we're happy to share them with you. Here's one that's coming up that we know about thanks to one of you. And it's about sort of post-COVID in the hospitality and tourism industry. And I bet that lots of you are either experienced in hospitality and tourism or will go into hospitality and tourism. And there are all sorts of overlaps that can happen, especially with biology in this area. So if you're at all interested in navigating the new normal, the event is next week. We've posted the link in the chat as well. It's next week though, so don't all go clicking because whoever owns that link is then going to get like a whole bunch of emails to say that you're waiting, which is awesome, but don't do it yet. And this slide will be posted with the lecture slides at the end. So if you need the link again, you can go in the chat for today right at the top, or you can get it here off of the slide when we post it. Okay.
The new normal makes me think of John Mann, which makes me think of Spirit of the West, which makes me both sad and happy at the same time.
Oh, yeah, that is sad and happy. Okay. Delightful.
I am answering a question on the chat about who the peoples are.
Who the peoples are?
Because there is who the researcher that we were talking about that conducts hagfish.
Doug
The principal
Fudge.
one was Dr. Doug Fudge, who is now at Chapman University in the earthquake state in California with his family. And there are others around Guelph who still do some. Dr. Todd Gillis does some.
Yep.
And I'm just looking up some of the other...
The other people?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
The other
Okay.
folks. Dr. Shorno is
Dr.
one.
Shorno.
Who you might have in other classes at some
Yes, you might be taught by Dr. Sharna in the very future because she's awesome.
point. Yeah.
Wonderful. Good. Okay, cool. Hagfish. Check them out. They're weird. Homework question. So we gave you some homework. It was a bit vague. I hope you didn't mind it. Because I hope if you did it, you did a lot of learning, right? So we prompt you with questions. in hopes that you will then go and explore and learn some stuff. So here is a question that might follow from the homework that we assigned. You have not seen this before, so let's throw it at you now. And we'll give you a bit of time. See how you do as you move through it. There we go. Hopefully it copied correctly. The whole question didn't copy because we ran out of characters. So the full root there is on the slide, and then the options are the same as the ones that are given in on the slide. Okay.
Should we be very quiet? Very, very quiet. The microphone can't hear me. Very quiet.
What's the answer?
I think I don't want to see. It's true, right? Appropriate. A is inappropriate. B is inappropriate.
We should have like totally inappropriate things to say. I'd like to pick my nose on some days.
Indeed. Then they'll know it was written by you. Because you're the only person I know that starts phrases with indeed. Yeah. Indeed you are. Actually, Aunt Louise too. Used to put up my romance.
Really?
Yeah. Indeed. She's like, people don't talk like that. And I said, indeed.
Indeed.
And that made her nuts.
Okay. About 20 more seconds.
Is my hair okay? The translation didn't even agree. It was like,
No,
You can't mean hair.
your hair is not okay. There's something really wrong with it.
It's very shiny.
It's gone. Okay.
you can Google the phrase. There's an image online. Dr. Alex Smith Guelph with
hair. Yeah, you can see. I've never seen Dr.
Resplendent.
Alex Smith's hair.
It was gorgeous. Flowing locks. Actually, it wasn't flowing, it was matted.
Matted?
Matted dreads.
Oh no. Okay, wonderful. 82% of you have responded. If you want to get an answer in the next 5 seconds, go ahead.
Can I just say?
No. I have more of a comment
I have
than a
more
question.
of a comment than a question. My comment is
Yes.
that everybody's rocking it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well done. Okay. Yes. The answer in this case is C. It is true the importance of abiotic and biotic factors may differ at different scales. Why do we know that? Why is that true? What one did we learn about where it was very clearly one of those categories that was way important? In the chat.
Nous attendons le chat. Curly. No. Curly's talking about other things. It was Curly. Yes. Biomes.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Yeah. So biomes, remember, only two variables, both abiotic, right? Temperature,
somebody's got it.
precipitation. Oh no. Okay. So yeah, biomes are the ones that just like nothing biotic going on with respect to explaining their differences and their distinctions, right? So, and then of course, as we get sort of lower down in geographic scale, more into local scale, the biological or the biotic factors become so much more important because temperature and precipitation aren't going to explain the biological diversity differences from the woodlots, for example, North Campus Ravine to the Dairy Bush. Like, same amount of precipitation, more or less, same temperature fluctuations, more or less, right? So there have to be other factors, and that's where the biotic comes into play quite a lot more. Okay, really good. Well done. Yay to all of you. Okay, we are working on why are species where they are and why are they not where they aren't. What?
That is very Yoda. Species, why aren't they where they're not?
Okay.
Species not. No, species do.
Yeah. Okay, so there are several options for why are species not where they aren't. And it's kind of, like it just kind of get it in your head. Okay, why are they not there? Why are polar bears not in Antarctica, right? Why are palm trees not in Ontario? So this is why are species not where they aren't. And there are sort of different hypotheses, different reasons or explanations for why they might be there or not be there, right? So for a species to not be somewhere, it could be because they died out. So they were there and they died out and they went extinct, or they were extirpated. Difference between those two terms. And it can be that they just can't live there. And it could be that they could live there, but they just never got there.
Yep.
Or it could be that they live here, but other species are keeping it away. So it could live there, but it can't because something else is keeping it away.
And those are some of the cool things we're going to be talking about. I wanted to throw in a cool thing that's not actually, well, the bears that you talked about. Why are there no polar bears in Antarctica?
Yeah.
So what does Arctic mean?
The bear.
Here be bears. What does Antarctica mean?
There be no bears.
There be no bears. That's freaking amazing.
That's amazing.
It's
Yeah,
unfortunately referring to the stars, but it's
But
also
it's
kind of
also-
like, look around. What do you see? Not any bears.
Yep. Actually, it's really kind of freaky because those places were named before they were known.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they say that it's because of the stars, but maybe they were known. Maybe there was like some ancient knowledge of these places before where there were bears and where there weren't. Who knows? But the story goes that it's named after the stars.
Yeah.
But
Let's think
maybe-
about it as bears.
Yeah. Okay. So these are all hypotheses, biological for reals, serious biological hypotheses, and you can test them, right? You can say, okay, I'm in this place, I don't see this species. What are the reasons, possible reasons for it? Here they are, and there are these like techno-speak biological terms for it. Don't worry about those things right now. What would I have to see in order to accept one of these possible hypotheses? What would I have to do, and what would I have to see as a result, or hear, or understand, or discover, or whatever, or test, right? And this is really what we want you to focus on in ecology, is the possible explanations, and then the likely one is the result of doing some kind of research protocol, right? Okay, so how would we test these possibilities, right? What would we have to see in order to go, yeah, okay, it was here, but it's not anymore. And so that's an extirpation or that's an extinction, right? So there's all sorts of evidence, and that's what we're going to talk about. But before that, we have to throw at you two terms, and this is cool stuff.
It's really cool stuff, as long as you say it properly. If
That's
you don't say
this
it
word
properly, we disown you.
That's right. But what I will say, in absolute respect to our colleagues who pronounce it in a different way, we are just joking. Maybe not. So this word right here, because actually a lot of words that we learn, we never actually hear or see someone say.
Okay, so here I'm with you entirely. That never ever judge anyone who's using a word that they've learned by reading it for the first time when they're saying it. And I can say that as someone who went around talking about paradigms. And I think this is a paradigm shift, until a very confused TA in my first year university said, "Do you mean paradigm? Is that what you're trying to say? And I was like, I just shrunk.
Yeah. So let's not kind of jump on people who,
Yeah.
who pronounce things differently than we do.
But to me, this rhymes with quiche.
It rhymes with quiche, and it is niche. And you might hear it pronounced
Just tell me how to say it. The
Just
suspense
tell
is
me.
killing me. Fundamental.
Niche and realized niche, okay? And you can say niche, but, well, if you hear it, be patient, understand that there are just differences in the way that things are pronounced, okay? So it's niche.
But it is actually not paradigm.
And now they're like, just get on with it. Okay, so getting on with it. We did abiotic and biotic for a reason, and this to me is so cool, the way that they connect. They don't totally connect, so they're different terms, right? Just like divergent, convergent, homoplazy, homology, all of those things, right? Like they're different, but they're like similar. Yeah. So here's how they're similar. When we define a fundamental niche, that is all of the conditions and space in a habitat that an organism could survive, okay? That's the fundamental niche. A niche is a kind of, it's a complex term. It just means sort of in time and space where something can be. It can refer to their sort of ecological job. It's their role or where they occupy time and space. That's a niche. And a fundamental niche is all of the places on the planet, and even, I mean, if you want to extend it beyond, go ahead, where an organism can survive. So we're talking mostly about physiological tolerances. Can it survive and thrive within this area? Yes, there are some biological factors that can play a role in determining fundamental niche, but for the most part, they are abiotic. Like, is the temperature range okay? Is the pH range okay? Is the salinity range okay? These are all abiotic factors that help determine the fundamental niche of an organism.
It's kind of the Goldilocks.
Yeah.
The Goldilocks just on her own. Too hot, too cold, just right.
Just right. Oh, good.
The bears, the rest of the bears are the next thing.
Amazing. So this is what we might look at if we're looking at something called tolerance ranges. And we are going to dive into this more in the physiology, but it's super important to, again, it's all linked to the ecology, right?
Wait a second. All these things are linked?
I know.
It's amazing.
Okay, so if we were going to plot this and look at this sort of on a graph, we might look, for example, on the x-axis, some abiotic factor, let's say temperature.
Temperature, please,
temperature.
please.
You like temperature?
Oh.
Do you want
Dr.
to
Jacobs,
Do you want to explain this? This
no,
is like, okay.
I'm happy sniping over your shoulder.
Okay. Okay, so we might put temperature on the x-axis, and then we might, on the y-axis, put the number of surviving individuals, right? This is a histogram, very similar to what we've done before. Instead of having just bars, we're just going to do like a curve instead. And we're going to look at the optimum. So more individuals survive at this temperature range, right? Over here than they do over here, and we get our nice normal distribution.
And so if you don't want to kill your individuals, it could also be a performance curve as well. So if you want to change the subtlety of your y-axis, it could be how well things are dealing with
how fast ants run.
That's right. That is literally an example in the literature.
Wonderful. Okay. So you can put a lot of harsh things on the y-axis, or you can put some subtle friendly things on the y-axis. Okay. Good. But
what?
Life is never just with one variable, and of course it's going to be more complex than that.
Would that it were so simple.
So imagine a world in which there were 3 variables that varied in an ecosystem. And of course there are infinity minus 1 variables. Okay, but just we're not so good at working beyond 3-dimensional graphs, and so we'll stick to 3. So we have environmental factor number 1. Let's just say it's temperature again. Environmental factor number 2. Let's say that it's pH. Environmental factor number 3. Let's say that it's precipitation. Okay? And so what we can do then is take a look at the tolerance ranges of the organism and create this three-dimensional space, this fundamental niche in which that particular organism can survive and thrive. And so then what we can do is take a look along the different axes to get our tolerance ranges. And of course, a different organism is going to occupy different space. It may overlap a little bit. It may completely engulf the other one, but we can understand where it could potentially survive and thrive. Fundamental niche. And then, of course, not everything occupies all of its fundamental niche.
And how come?
Because of the biotic factors.
Because the bears come back. Because Goldilocks has chosen her fundamental niche.
You've totally like blown my mind with Goldilocks. It's really good. Okay, so Goldilocks is like picking the different temperature of bowls of food to eat and the beds to sleep in, and she's like figured out her fundamental niche, where she wants to be, and then all of a sudden the bears come back, and that's a biotic factor. That's competition.
Species interaction.
That's right. That's species interaction.
And potentially predation.
And predation. Right. Goldilocks shouldn't really survive and thrive once the bears get back. And
yeah,
so
it should go all Leonardo DiCaprio in Alberta.
Right. So what happens is the reality is different, right? The fundamental is lovely. It's kind of like the pie in the sky, perfect conditions. But the reality is such that we have lots and lots of biological factors that start to interrupt. And that is what we call the realized niche. So where actually that organism survives and thrives as a result of biological factors. That's the realized niche. So let's kind of work through this a little bit. We'd like to introduce you to a fun fish called Peaceful John. Now, Peaceful John is very peaceful. This particular sort of scenario was set up by a former graduate student of mine, who I just love everything that he did to try to explain fundamental and realized niche. And so
this was Eric?
Yeah.
A former student who is now a prof at the Université de Montréal, I think.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Okay, so fundamental niche. Peaceful John lives in a fishbowl. With a little house, and everything's great. He lives by himself. If we think about Peaceful John's fundamental niche, so we could, for example, put temperature on this axis, pH on this axis, and go, okay, Peaceful John can occupy this space, right, within those axes of those two variables, for example. But remember, there are all sorts of other abiotic variables that are contributing to Peaceful John's fundamental niche. And as long as the water stays within this region of those variables, Peaceful John is happy, surviving, and thriving, and everything's fine. The temperature could go up a little bit. Peaceful John would be fine as long as it doesn't come into the gray space. Okay? So Peaceful John, super happy, fundamental niche maintained within the fishbowl. Cool. Except badass fish shows up.
Bum, bum, bum.
Right. So badass fish is badass and smokes cigars. And all of a sudden, Peaceful John is now in a space that has a biological competitor, right? And something's got to give. Something has to happen, especially if badass fish's fundamental niche is an overlap of Peaceful John's, right? So there has to be some kind of result or some kind of resolution to the conflict.
There must be words.
Words.
They must have words if there is that overlap.
That's right. So imagine a scenario then in which Peaceful John all of a sudden starts living in the house. Okay, that could be a resolution as long as badass fish stays outside the house.
And there's lots of people who are supporting not keeping goldfish in small bowls, and we are not advocating for that. But imagine this: so you are Peaceful John or Jean, and you are out, and then badass Jean decides to live in your house. What's up, Jean?
What's up, right?
But she's smoking cigars. She's there the whole time. There will have to be words.
There will be words. Okay. So what happens then is Peaceful John's actual niche, realized niche, the space and time that is occupied now by Peaceful John is reduced as a result of competition with badass fish or with the biological factor. Okay, so the realized niche is I have a very hard time imagining a situation in which the realized niche is not smaller than the fundamental. So the vast majority of the times,
Let's ask, see if they do.
yeah, the
'Cause
realized
I have an idea.
niche, yeah, I do too, but like that's like a crazy exception, a bizarre exception.
So I'm going to give you one idea of mine as to where there might be an exception, because what Dr. Jacobs has said is so accurate that there is almost all of the cases there's something else. Would that it were so simple, as we said in the chat. One exception that I can think of, and throw yours if you've got some other ideas in the chat, would be a species translocation, where species brought from Europe to North America, then all of a sudden,
yeah, that's good.
Look at me. You just kind of like, you spread out and you mansplain on the chair and your knees are wide and you're like, look at this. I'm taking up all this space.
Totally. That's good. Okay.
Yes, zebra mussels. Yeah.
Zebra mussels.
Oh,
that's
raccoons
really
in
good.
cities.
Yeah. Okay. So amazing. Okay. So the realized niche is usually, almost always, much smaller than the fundamental niche as a result of interactions with biological factors.
Yeah.
Okay. So fundamental, mostly explained by abiotic, realized, mostly explained by biotic factors. Okay?
Somebody's suggesting Europeans.
Yes. Good one.
Yeah.
Very accurate.
Yep.
Okay. Now, once we're talking about the realized niche, there may be sort of different responses, different ways that Peaceful John can respond. So in the previous scenario, we suggested that Peaceful John moves into the house and everything's all good. But there are other things that Peaceful John could do that are sort of these ecological responses. And the three that we're going to kind of introduce to you to learn are competitive exclusion, which just mean that Peaceful John pieces out, like just goes away. Now, he can go away or he can die out. That's competitive exclusion. It's more about the result or the outcome rather than the way in which that happened.
Sometimes people talk about that as the ghost of competition past, that their things are not there because of competitions in the past. If you join the Stanley Cup playoffs in round 3, there were other teams. They're not there anymore. They have been out-competed.
They have been competitively excluded.
Yeah, like your Toronto Maple Leafs.
No! Okay. He's a Montreal fan. Okay, so that's competitive exclusion. Character displacement was more about living in the house. So basically what happens is they've displaced, or Peaceful John changes his characters, his traits, his behavior, his physiological tolerances, his something about his traits, his biological traits, in order to be able to reduce competition. So, for example, Peaceful John, the species of Peaceful John, may become nocturnal as a way of minimizing, or maybe selected for becoming nocturnal, right? Remember, this isn't going to be intentionally done, but through the process of mutation and selection and evolution, over time, Peaceful John may become nocturnal, such that they are looking for food at different times, or smoking cigars at different times.
And these are such real examples, because remember that curve of tolerance. Yeah. So it's not Peaceful John going, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change my alarm clock. This is a population of Johns or genes, and one end of that distribution going, okay, I used to be a bit marginal, but now I'm producing more offspring than the rest of that distribution is. And this change in space is actually really common. Space and time. In physics, it's important. In biology, it's important.
And so becoming a quadruped.
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
So you can imagine species can change if you come out in the year earlier. If you breed earlier in the year, you might be escaping that space where the badass gene is now sitting.
If you come out of the ocean and start breathing oxygen directly from, like breathing air,
Yes,
then
quadrupeds.
all of a sudden, like endless opportunity, right? Competition reduced. Okay. The next one is coexistence at a reduced carrying capacity. We'll introduce carrying capacity to you later, but basically just a population size decrease. So, okay, fine, I'll stay with you in this bowl, but there will be fewer of us, right? Fine.
Passive aggressive.
That's right. It's the passive aggressive approach.
Goldilocks and the bears never make eye contact.
Yeah.
They're just like, mm-mm.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to tell you a story about one of these things that will hopefully blow your mind.
Here's a story.
But first, a
In a
quick
second.
question. So I haven't prepared this as a poll. So what I want you to do is just to take a look. Don't stamp yet. On 3, I will ask you to stamp. So just hold off, read the question. If badass fish moves into Peaceful John territory and over time the Peaceful John species becomes nocturnal, which type of response is this? It's an easy question. 1. Oh, okay, go ahead. Sorry, it wasn't in our usual format, so I didn't see it to
That's
prepare
all right.
a poll.
This
But
is-
anyway,
this gets people using
super easy
hearts
question.
and
yeah, well done. Super good. People are hating on badass fish. Yeah, Peaceful John's cool.
somebody described it as an Al Capone fish.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
I liked it.
Okay, wonderful. Good. Clear all drawings. Just to see if you were listening up and if we explained it right. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay.
This is the story. These are not, these are kind of the authors of the story. These are some of the authors of the story. And we'll circle around to an amazing book that you can go out and find online or find in the library and take a look at later on.
Yeah.
But this is a story about birds, and these are some of the authors of the story. This is Dr. Peter and Rosemary Grant. Dr. Peter and Rosemary Grant, who started their professorships at McGill University in the 60s and 70s. Peter, on the left, was actually tenured there. And McGill did not. This is going to seem like a familiar story, perhaps,
Heard this
to
story
Margaret
before.
Davis, maybe like yesterday, maybe things that are still going on. Peter was granted tenure, and presumably McGill presumed that they would get the free labor of Dr. Rosemary Grant as well, at much less reduced. But Peter and Rosemary Grant said, and they decided to move along, I believe, to Michigan State University and then eventually to Princeton. Their research in the 60s looked at competition in birds on islands and was principally done in and around Mexico. And it was very popular and ecologically interesting. And then in the early 70s, they were offered a trip to tag along to the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador, or of Ecuador in the Pacific Ocean, the famous Galapagos Islands of Darwin's Beagle's stop. What they found there blew their minds, and over time blew the rest of our minds. So this is a look at these volcanic little protuberances in the Pacific Ocean. I would love to say that I have been here and I have memories, and I have not been here. But you're looking at me going,
I have. It's so cool. Okay, go.
So one of the stories here, of course, that Darwin talked about, even, and then David Lack after, like 100 years later, people had talked about variation, how there seems to be specific types of organisms that are somewhat similar to the things in that maybe that genus that we would see on the mainland or in South America, but they're different here. As people delved more and more visits, more and more taxonomic groups were examined, what they found was that it was even the detail, the diversity was even more finely grained. That it was not just these islands were different from South America, it's that islands, there was inter-island variation. And one of the ways that made itself clear, very apparently clear to these ornithologists, was in the shape of the beaks of these finches. So Geospiza, these are they are species of Geospiza, of a spinch, the spinch on the spilins, the beak of the spinch. You're cut off, Dr. Smith. So there's multiple species here, but we'll focus in this little quick story, and there's many more of these. There's Geospiza fortis, a strong fortis with a great big seed cracking beak. And then there's Fulginosa on the bottom with a much more narrow, elegant, maybe granivorous, maybe something that can eat a slightly smaller and less heavy thing. And what they found was on Daphne major, where a lot, which is like just a volcanic kind of a cone. It's really nothing.
Yeah.
Google it and take a look at it. There's only fortis, only eating those big nutty things. On Los Hermanos, there's only Fulginosa. But on Santa Cruz, they both exist. Now, what Dr. Grant's, plural, were doing was capturing finches and taking morphological measurements, including of this nice big protruding beak.
So, yeah, the measurements that are usually taken to describe beaks are beak depth. So that is from the bottom to the top at the biggest point, and beak length. Which can be in many different places depending upon the species, but it's usually some indication of length this way. Okay, cool. So what did they find?
Well, it blew their minds.
So
what they found, so remember Daphne major, if Daphne major, that volcanic cone where only fortis, they found kind of 9, 10, maybe a mean size of about 10. These are inches, which I hate, but no, they won't be inches.
No,
They'll be millimeters. Centimeters.
Millimeters.
Yeah, that'd be good. Just a finch, little finch dragging along.
In which an
9
invertebrate
inch.
biologist should not be talking about vertebrates.
I can't say anything. My beak is 12 inches long. So
Very depth. So
Yeah.
it's this, yeah.
So we are looking at the size, the crushing capacity, and you can see it's big. Okay,
Yeah.
but it's a normal distribution. There's variation on either side, but it's plus or minus a normal distribution.
Right.
On Los Hermanos, where there's only Fulginosa, similar distribution, but it's shifted
Smaller. Yeah.
and it's smaller.
Yeah.
Santa Cruz, where there is sympatry, remember we've introduced that word sympatry, where they're living together, they're separated. And they seem to displace each other. They seem to move, so we take advantage of that part of the population here, which can make bigger beaks, which makes bigger beaks. And this part of the distribution here that makes smaller beaks. And so they seem to be avoiding competition here by displacing each other. Displacing not just, so we've talked about character displacement in terms of the beak, but what that results in is adaptation or use of different niches.
That's right. It's one of the reasons, if we can talk about reasons for why variation within a population is adaptive itself, right? So yes, Geospiza fortis has a big beak, and if all of them had a big beak of, say, 10 or 11 millimeters, then great, they would be able to crack their seeds. And in the context of competition, they may very well not be able to be as successful if there isn't the opportunity for character displacement. And again, we're talking as though these things are intentional. They are not, right? But variation itself within a population is a resilient evolutionary or adaptive strategy, okay? There are some traits where variation would totally suck, like the number of hearts that we have, right? 0 hearts would be terrible, 2 hearts would be complicated. And so there's no variation in the number of hearts that we have in that trait. But many, many things have variation, like the size of our heart, or the volume that it can pump.
Or pelosity.
Or hair length. So these things can be used as a resilient adaptive strategy in the context of changing competitive landscapes. And this is the example that you have here.
And this is a great example. And so as you dig into I hope you have the opportunity either in future, in your own interests, maybe in travel, but also just in classes like future ecology or evolution courses. There's so many examples of this, like the arrival of a drought and what happens, because this character displacement kind of shifts through time as well. Yeah. There's a couple of comments here, and I'm going to actually make use of one of them. And they're about why are there so few of either species in between on Santa Cruz. So I think I'm reading that. I was reading it incorrectly. So I think we've answered why they're in between, and it's because they're compete. There's avoiding the direct competition.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make note that in terms of one of our lectures early on, 2 or 3, I think we talked about bad graphs, and we don't actually have numbers on the left-hand side. So if what you were asking is why are there fewer finches on Santa Cruz, we can't actually tell you that because we don't have numbers. We just have.
That's right.
We're making a cartoon for this story.
Yeah.
But it comes from data.
Cool. Okay, amazing book.
It's older now, but it's a great one.
It's so well written, and it tells the story of the Grants, basically.
Starts with David Lack and then to the Grants.
Yeah,
which is great. They need
storytelling.
Yeah.
They're a good couple, and they have wonderful adventures, and so it integrates the science into their family and into sort of the humanity of doing it in a way that is completely wonderful and accessible. So if you want to read a good book, it is timely now. It is old, but
old doesn't mean bad.
No, old doesn't mean bad.
The other thing is, I was dumping on McGill earlier. McGill tried to make somewhat of amends. They granted Rosemary Grant an honorary degree in 2002.
Yeah, and
it doesn't make up for.
No.
But it's reparations.
We get to do a very similar thing in granting somebody, an honorary degree who should have been recognized from the very beginning. And so we're going to be excited about that, and we'll talk about it as soon as we know more.
You won't be able to stop us talking
about it. Okay, amazing. So the research question, right? We've given you all sorts of hypotheses, totally plausible explanations for why something isn't there, why something is there, what happens when two things get together, right? All the different sort of potential responses that could happen. And one of the big mystery is to kind of figure out which one of these things is it likely going to be, right? Based on the evidence. That's what an ecologist does. And so we want to be able to figure out how and what is limiting the distribution of things. And we can focus on abiotic or biotic conditions, for example. We're going to go through this very quickly because it does lead up to some homework. So for your homework, kind of go through this a little bit more slowly, and then we'll take up the homework at the next class. But basically what you can do in order to figure out, for example, if you wanted to figure out what are the abiotic conditions that are limiting the distribution of a species. So now we're worrying about the fundamental niche more so than the realized. We can do field observations of the actual distribution of those species, understanding, of course, that in the field we're looking at the realized niche. But if we look at them like over great geographic distribution, it might tell us something about the abiotic conditions that are limiting it. We could determine ecological tolerances. We could look at correlations between environmental gradients and a species' optimum range. We could do experiments, transplanting or moving things around to see whether or not they survive. There are many more things that we can do, but just to give you an idea that there isn't only one way to determine what the abiotic factors are that limit the distribution of a species.
But even if as we list these, I think probably you're already starting to think, if you're thinking kind of pragmatically about, well, how would I do that? Perhaps you can see that some of these are going to be better done with some taxa than with others.
Very much
Perhaps
so.
more difficult with elephants, and
it
maybe
would be hard
more easy with trees.
Yeah, it would be hard to transplant polar bears to Antarctica.
To test it.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't get permission.
No. It would be ethically so wrong. Okay. So we can talk about trees. Do you want to talk about trees?
Yeah,
quickly.
we talked about this a little bit in terms of that you've seen a distribution of the sugar maple excuse me, on Monday when we talked about Dr. Davis mapping their spread, their post-glacial spread across North America. Here's a contemporary distribution.
Yep.
A large continuous paint blob that has smeared across, and then some Jackson Pollock smatterings into the west. And we see this the edge coinciding with an average wintertime low temperature of less than or around minus 18 degrees Celsius, and the mean summertime high temperatures of being at or greater than 24 degrees Celsius. So this is a way of looking at these abiotic conditions across space. But rarely that smear, that kind of, I think of it as a Peterson guidebook. Those were the guidebooks that we had around the house growing up. And they made sense. They're kind of appealing to a very 40, 30,000, 10,000 foot view of the world when you're up in the airplane looking down. And that's what this slide is trying to take a look at. So natural boundaries are rarely actually as smooth as that. There's an exception, and maybe you can throw an exception in the chat. But much more, they're aligned at a certain scale. And then when you zoom in, you can see from left to right here, they become fuzzier and fuzzier. So an actual line, hard edge, is very rarely hard. It's a much more fuzzy thing. That doesn't make it any less real. That's just about the fact that in a terrestrial environment, microclimates are there and species know about that.
So, yeah? Okay.
Oh, sorry. I didn't actually even look to see if somebody put in...
We're like super running out of
Okay,
time.
oceans.
Yeah.
Hard boundary.
Okay, hard boundary. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that we can do is a transplant experiment to understand whether or not that individual organism or that species could live over here, but doesn't, or whether it can't live over there because of its tolerance ranges or tolerance to different abiotic factors. So we can transplant, and again, like just imagine ethics are not in consideration here. This is just like technically in science we can do this. Whether we should do it is a completely different conversation and one that I'm happy to have. But imagine a transplant study in which we take trees from one place where they actually are and we transplant them in a place where they are not. And then what we can do is determine whether or not they survive and thrive, and then understand what the abiotic conditions are there to increase the range that we now know is their abiotic tolerance or their fundamental niche. And also recognizing, of course, that there's never going to be a place that's free of biotic conditions. And so it's more about realized niche potential. And we can infer the abiotic conditions, but it's always, complicated by the fact that we're doing these in sort of, real life in the world. And so, it's complex. If we want to simplify, we have to bring things into the lab in order to control them, right? But we can do this. One thing that you must do, though, is if you transplant species outside of their range, you also have to transplant them inside of their range. And that's because it's entirely possible that the species that you're trying to study is just not tolerating transplantation itself. So it doesn't like
it's like
you.
A value judgment. It's
yeah,
like, I do not
I'm not
you.
doing this.
Yeah.
And so if they're not able to be transplanted, then your results outside of the transplant range or outside of the actual range are not going to be valid because that type of experimental design doesn't work for that organism. Okay, so this is the homework set up really, really quickly. There were a group of people that went out and tried to understand what's going on with tree line with elevation. So not with latitude, but with elevation up a mountain. And they set up a transplant experiment in order to be able to study this. They had 3 different treatments. The first one was transplanting to an area that had shade and competition for water. So 2 variables that they're playing with. One of them, another treatment was a transplant study or transplant to bare soil. So that's lots of light, no shade, and no competition for water. So there weren't any other species around. And the third condition was on bare soil, surrounded by other species that were providing shade. So lots of light, but, surrounded by other species that were competing for water. Okay, so these are the conditions: shade, lots of light, or competition for water, no competition for water. So these were where they were transplanted outside of their existing range. And these are the results that they got. So this is looking at the percent survival of those that were transplanted, assuming that they tolerated transplanting to begin with, and the different combinations of those 2 variables. So what we'd like you to do for homework is to take a look at these data and try to come up with a conclusion for experiment 1 and a conclusion for experiment 2 about which of the variables are the most important in determining survival of the species that is transplanted outside of its range.
So this should be a challenge. These are questions that need you to fight with them.
Yep.
We've gone over time just slightly.
Just slightly.
But
Take care.
yeah. Have a great weekend. Take care of each other.
Bye.